So, let's talk about Pokemon. So, welcome back to another episode of Late Night with the Moth Green. So, of course, this is going to be talking about a specific controversy that was surrounding Pokemon Sword and Shield. So, these games came out in 2019, and, well, it's safe to say they're kind of controversial. For quite a few reasons. Probably the biggest reason was, well, no national dex. So I guess we should explain what that is. So the national dex was a upgraded Pokedex, and I guess technically it made its first appearance in the Gen 2 games. Because you could order your Pokedex by the Johto regional dex or the national dex. And of course, it would make appearances in subsequent Pokemon games. And the task for that was to really just complete it. And it's a daunting task. And so, of course, as time went on, the National Dex was altered in various ways. From being kind of, optional in Gold and Silver to not really being in Ruby and Sapphire. Well, at least until you traded Pokemon from different games. More on that later. Or to just being kind of given to the player after they complete the game. But of course, the National Dex really was gone kind of after Gen 6. At least in a way. So of course, I guess let's talk about the history of the National Dex real quick. So, in Gen 3, the National Dex wasn't really there, unless you traded Pokemon from a different game. The issue is that, the only games that Ruby and Sapphire could trade with at launch were with each other. It wasn't until Fire and Leaf Green that being able to work more on the National Dex became a goal. In fact, I don't even think you got the National Dex until you traded with an outside game. Then, of course, you have it in Fire and Leaf Green. You can complete the National Dex once you complete the post game. So we already have some restrictions on what Pokemon can and can't be used in Gen 3. Because in Fire and Leaf Green, you can only use Pokemon from Kanto and Johto until you beat the post-game, and only certain Pokemon from Johto. Now, sure, once you were able to trade with Ruby and Sapphire, you were able to get other Pokemon. But that's really not until you complete the post-game, and by that point, there's no really real reason to really continue playing after the post-game. And of course, other Pokemon games would of course fix this. You can of course be able to trade over Pokemon from Heart Gold and Soul Silver to Diamond Pearl whenever, just as long as you have access to trade. And honestly, Gen 4 did it in a really good way because they don't really restrict what Pokemon you can use. Provided you have a game that can trade them, you're able to use a lot of these Pokemon. And it's the same thing with Gen 5, at least for the most part. Black and White do require you to complete the main game before you can really even trade over Pokemon. And Black and White too do have outside Pokemon, so really you can trade with Black and White with those games. You just gotta have the first badge. But of course, this was another case of restricting Pokemon for players, which is one of the reasons why the Gen 5 games were a bit controversial. Then, of course, you have Gen 6, where in X and Y, you had to wait until Pokemon Bank came out in order to transfer Pokemon. Same thing with Pokemon Bank. Well, Pokemon Bank and Transporter, alright? And sure, ORAS did fix quite a bit of this issue by making all the other missing Pokemon obtainable. it also kind of took a year just for this to happen. So if you didn't have Pokemon Bank or Transporter, you can only use the Pokemon that were specifically native to the Kalos region. Then, of course, we get to Sun and Moon, where the National Dex, it's just gone. You can still transfer Pokemon from older games, but again, you need Pokemon Transporter and Pokemon Bank, which is kind of unfortunate. And none of these Pokemon even get Dex entries. Like, the Nidoran line isn't in the National Dex. Well, they're not in the Pokedex for Sun and Moon or Ultra Sun and Moon, so you don't get any Pokedex entries for them, which kind of makes it not as worth it to evolve everything in these games, because you're not really gonna get anything from that. Sure, you can still use them in game, at least for now. It's a bit of a letdown being able to transfer Pokemon only for them not to be in a Pokedex. Then, of course, we have Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, where those two games can only transfer over Pokemon from previous games, provided that they were in the Kanto Pokedex. So Sylveon cannot be obtained in Let's Go, which is very unfortunate, and they really missed an opportunity with that. Then, of course, we have Pokemon Sword and Shield, which remain to be some of the most controversial games in the series for quite a few reasons. Obviously, aside from graphics, not being able to transfer over your Pokemon was a huge sore subject when it came to fans. It was announced that a lot of Pokemon would not be able to be transferred over to Sword and Shield. This wasn't a temporary thing. This wasn't just get Pokemon Bank /Home now. No, this was like, even if you had them, you weren't able to transfer them. So that meant that a lot of Pokemon, like the Nidoran line, for example, were not able to be transferred into Sword and Shield until the DLC came out. And sure, the DLC did kind of fix a lot and did reintroduce a lot of old Pokemon, but at the same time, this also was one of the more controversial moments in Pokemon, because for the first time in the series, you were truly limited to what you could use. Sure, other games kind of temporarily limited what you could use, or at least had harsh restrictions, like Ruby and Sapphire, but other Pokemon games, like, from Diamond Pearl all the way to Sun and Moon, really let you use whichever Pokemon you wanted to. And so it makes it very unfortunate that just suddenly in Sword and Shield you just can't use them. And of course this continues with Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shine Pearl, because, well, only the first 493 Pokemon could be transferred to that game. Anything after Arceus is not available in the game, which is a huge missed opportunity, because Pokemon themselves have always made a lot of new Pokemon available in the remakes, and generally encourage you to try out the new Pokemon, and it kind of could change how the game plays by using some of these new Pokemon, but limiting what was in Brilliant Diamond and Shine Pearl kind of just feels like a huge step back. And then, of course, we have Legends Arceus, where there's only Pokemon in that specific region that could be transferred. And then Scarlet and Violet did the same thing, where only Pokemon are available in the Pokedex can be transferred. So Pokemon has been doing this for, well, years at this point. So it's very obvious that we're just not going to be able to fully complete the National Dex ever again. Legends CA came out, and you can only use Pokemon in that game too. So why is this so controversial, and why did this anger a lot of people? Well, The reason why this was so controversial is that part of the freedom of Pokemon was to use various Pokemon. It changed the game and how it was played. Yeah, you can use a Pikachu in black and white, and that could kind of change how the game plays. And you can use a Manectric on your next team in the same game. It added a sense of freedom that other RPGs kind of lacked at times. And sure, there's other games that do limit what monsters could be used. For example, the Persona series and Shin Megami Tensei. These two series do have a lot of demons that you can use, and not all the games have all the demons. In fact, even some re-releases don't do that. Like Persona 3 Portable versus Persona 3 Reload, they have different demons. Demons that were in, Personas that were in Portable aren't in Reload, and vice versa. So it's a little understandable that they tweak the rosters to really kind of change how the game is played. But, to kind of criticize Pokemon, that's never been a thing with Pokemon. Like, sure, there's specific Pokemon to a region. You're not going to find a Butterfree in Hoenn, but you would still be able to train one in Hoenn provided you meet all the right requirements. And it really made it such an entertaining experience to go through. And so us not being able to really, for us really not being able to use some of these Pokemon anymore, it's a little heartbreaking, and it really does kind of show, it kind of does leave us off on an era of Pokemon where these games generally kind of did grant a bit more freedom. Now, of course, this is not meant to be like, Pokemon is bad, it's going downhill, never gonna play it again. No, because we're still gonna play Pokemon. We're excited for what happens next after Pokemon. We have an entire channel dedicated to Pokemon. We collect every Pokemon game. But the thing is that dealing with this is kind of annoying sometimes. And it does suck not being able to use specific Pokemon. Sure, Scarlet and Violet have over 500 Pokemon, or at least 600 something, making over half the Pokedex available. And, Sword and Shield, same thing. X and Y have 454, making about over half the Pokedex available. And, Ruby and Sapphire had half the Pokedex available too. And, Black and White too had half the Pokedex available at that time. And Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon had about half the Pokedex available at that time too. But at the same time, it also kind of sucks not being able to use some of our favorite Pokemon. I mean, heck, Butterfree isn't even in, it's not even in, Scarlet and Violet, and I don't even think it's in Legends ZA. It's definitely sad not being able to get to use our favorite Pokemon. And it hurts even more if it's Pokemon that we've transferred from years ago. Obviously, personally, I think my solution for this is for Pokemon to really bring back the national decks. Even if they make it available for DLC, sure, it wouldn't be the best, but being able to collect all the Pokemon in each game regardless would be nice. And there's obviously, the criticism says, this is a very popular franchise, and they're doing stuff like this. And yeah, we agree. I mean, we like Pokemon, but the Switch has had more demanding games on it. And with the Switch 2 out, there's not much of a reason that they couldn't do this. I mean, you can have all the Pokemon on the 3DS, and sure, this would definitely make the games a little bigger, But at the same time, there's also games like Assassin's Creed Shadows and Yakuza Kiwami on Switch, and these games are generally huge games. I mean, Assassin's Creed Shadows alone is 70 gigabytes, and we're gonna have Final Fantasy 7 remake on the Switch as well. And again, that's another huge game. So it just doesn't really make much sense that Pokemon itself just kind of really just cuts out so much Pokemon with each release now. But this was just kind of our thoughts on the National Dex and why it was so controversial. You know, kind of our thoughts on it. So, I guess for now, thank you all for watching, and hope you all have a wonderful day. We'll be back next time with a new video.